It's a packed house, isn't it? That's a good thing. So we got really two things we're introducing. I started doing this back in 2002. And I can remember what it was like when I got into it. My mother-in-law had been having some issues with her money, and I heard a lot about it and went to help her. But the day I decided to do this, I can remember my idea wasn't solely to help people with their money. I wanted people to have a good life and be happy. I don't know how many of you noticed the sign on the wall there, enable people to have a life otherwise wouldn't have. That's really my goal. So the money part of it, for a client may be difficult. For me, it's really a pretty academic exercise. And my eyes were really opened up tonight about 10 months ago. A gentleman that's one of my clients had came in and he's talking about some exercise he's doing at a local gym and how it's a different process that's not new, been around 30 years, but it was developed for people with osteoporosis, women, and how fantastic it was. And then he wanted to tell me that you do it, it takes you one day a week, 30 minutes at a time. And I did the math on that and thought, well, you know what? If Karen's going to do anything, she might do that. Karen's my wife. And I could never get her to the gym, even to bring my wallet, just wouldn't come up there. So I knew I was going to have trouble getting her to come see this new speaker about to be to exercise. So one of the women that I had been helping had lost a lot of weight. And I said, would you please talk to Karen and see if she'll go with us to check out this new regimen? And we go, and it was of enough of a scientific nature that Karen got involved with it. And she goes once a week for 30 minutes a day. And 10 months into it, a couple things have changed. Saturday mornings have changed in my house. It used to be I'd wake up in the morning before her, because she slept later than me. And I didn't bother that. I went and got my coffee, drank my coffee, kind of got my head clear. She woke up, made another cup of coffee, and her cup of tea. Well, now, she's not sleeping as much. So now, if I'm going to drink coffee by myself, I've got to set the alarm to do that. So she gets up much earlier, but beyond that, she's lost 52 pounds. My wife right there, wave your hand. I find it just remarkable. So I get very interested. I was very interested. And then she tells me that her trainer, who's been helping her, is going to be leaving. I said, leaving? Where's she going? Out of state. And I thought, great Scott, that's a problem. It's taking 38 years to get you here. Now we have progress. It has taken 38 years. So first off, any man in this room knows there's no way to tell your wife, honey, why don't you exercise? Because when you say that, what you're saying is, honey, you're fat. Right? We know this, right? So I started thinking about it, and I thought, you know, I know how I can make this work for my wife. If I start my own gym like this, and I only have one customer, and it's her, it's a raging success. And there's no joke with that. So, but I found out about this exercise, it's really quite different than anything you have ever heard about. The way it's done is different, the process is different, and it's really can be used for rehabilitation. So we have found about a man in New Orleans that has a facility like this. There's probably nobody to his superior in the world doing this, and very few at his level. And I went down just to pick his brain and learn. But something occurred after I left his office. I thought, that is really a nice dude. That is really a sweet man. And I want that man to help my clients. So I said, hey, I'm going to open this studio, and if I give you half interest in it, will you come treat my clients? And he said, sure, John, I will. And so over the next 30 minutes, before we asked him, you're going to hear a little bit about what this slow resistance exercise is. You know, I'll tell you what I do find out on a regular basis here at this office. I'll be visiting each one of you. And about once a year, somebody comes in, and they've gotten old. And I'll say to myself, well, Bob's gotten old. It happens overnight. What if you could slow that process down? What if you could reverse that process? And I'm going to turn that if into Ryan Hall. And Ryan, meet before. Share your story. And listen. By the way, most importantly, we have had 52 people do this today. So what I did, I told Ryan, I said, Ryan, it costs $40 for a session, $50 a run. I said, if you would like an analysis with one of our staff, Ryan's got several people that work with him, I'll pay the first session, and you'll do a consultation. But I encourage you, as you're hearing him speak, consider getting an evaluation done. Because if you don't, I do believe you'll get old sooner than you have to. Right?
You click play on that for me, on your computer? Yeah. Thanks.
Computer fix.
Exactly. So, you guys, I want to apologize ahead of time because I have a Macintosh, and or what they call it, Mac now. And so I created the program on Keynote. It works fine on PowerPoint on the Mac, but the fonts didn't go so well on here. So I'll do my best to explain all that stuff. I'd like to start out by showing you a few photos, and then I'm going to finish with a personal story. So, when we think of the aging process or we think of elderly, we generally think of sort of a deteriorated condition, weakness, frailty, inactivity, immobility, illness, hospitalization, depression, sort of not really living life to the fullest at all, but sort of existing, almost waiting for the end to come. And the thing is, it really does not have to be this way. So these are statistics. When I first gave this, this is a greatly reduced version of my original sarcopenia lecture, we'll talk about what that means, was in 2005. So this data was actually from 2003. And by 2030, the number of Americans over the age of 65 will double. And so what we're looking at is in 2030, we're going to have 20% of the population 65 and over, as opposed to today, which is about 12%. So it's the largest growing population in America today. Now, it's important to realize that the incidence of developing a debilitating condition doubles every 5 years over the age of 65. So if you're going to get a debilitating condition at 65, you have double the chance at 70, double the chance again at 75. This is, I guess you could compare this to compounding in the stock market. This compounds your life of developing a disabling condition. So it really doesn't have to be that way. We can remain strong, active, healthy throughout our entire lifespan if we do the necessary steps to achieve that goal. And so I'd like to start with a couple of stories from my personal clientele. This is Charlie Armbruster. Charlie trained with me a while back, and he was 85 years old at the time. Charlie was a stroke victim, and he had not gone through the rehabilitation process or the any training process after his stroke. So he was already in a walker. And the biggest thing that Charlie wanted to gain out of the training, out of getting stronger, was the fact that every night, invariably, somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, he would get up to go to the bathroom. His wife would help him. But he would have a fall almost every night. And so they would have to call a neighbor, inconvenience their neighbors, although the neighbors were more than happy to help him. But they'd have to wake him up 2 and 3 in the morning. He didn't want to be a burden to his neighbors anymore. What he was looking for was the ability to be able to get himself off the ground with the use of a chair or a stool. And in 3 months, he was able to do that with this training protocol that we do once a week for 30 minutes. So next, we took this. This is one of my very, very good friends, Augie Lanassa. He is 85 years old. He trains with me again once a week for 30 minutes. And he's on no medication. His HDL cholesterol is higher than his LDL cholesterol. He has no pain. He plays tennis also a couple times a week. And what's really funny is Augie is almost the epitome of laziness. He tells me, do I need to do anything else besides this once a week? So my response was, well, I want you to be active. I don't want you to just come here like one day a week and then sit in your easy chair the rest of the time. He tells me, but Ryan, you have to understand, when you get to be 85, the chair beckons. So we would go to a coffee shop, and if it was crowded, we have to park at the end of the parking lot. We get out the car, and he looks at how the distance that he has to walk, and he says, can we call Uber? So he's a riot. He's a good friend of mine. But yet, literally, with a small investment, although it's very intense, he's extremely mobile, and he also has no loss of cognitive function whatsoever. He's just as sharp as a tack. Matter of fact, we would talk the stock market all the time. Oh, by the way, Augie's been with me for over 20 years now. So many of my clients are extremely, extremely long-term. This is Joel. He actually lives in my condo complex, and he was referred to me by Augie. Joel is 82. Joel was, he almost lost his driver's license. He had no range of motion in his neck whatsoever, so he couldn't turn his neck from side to side, which was a real problem when it came to driving. He also had knee pain. He had no range of motion in his shoulder whatsoever, or very little. He could only come up about this high. So you can imagine just putting stuff in the microwave was a real chore for him. Started working with me. We started doing specific exercises for the cervical spine, cervical extension, along with a balanced exercise routine with the high-intensity strength training on the specialized equipment that we have. And he's been with me about 3.5 years now. Again, once a week, 30 minutes. Now, he does stay more active than Augie does. He likes to go to the mall walking every day. Somebody in the audience has actually taken a video of Joel training before, and he's very intense, but no pain, no medicine. He eats too many biscuits, but he still maintains a pretty athletic physique for an 82-year-old man. So we just took that a couple days ago. This, first of all, look at that face. Kay has been with me for, again, we're talking probably 20 years now, 18, 20 years. Kay is 68. Does she look like a 68-year-old? Look at the amount of muscle she has. Not that everybody wants to look like that, but the bottom line is there's a lot you can do to slow or reverse the aging process. Obviously, no medicine, no problems, no issues, no nothing. Susan Dwyer, she's 60 in that photo. Does that look like the body of a 60-year-old woman? Her dermatologist told me the other day that her dermatologist said that, Susan, you have a better body than most women in their 30s. Susan is actually one of a handful of clients that have been training with me since I was 18 years old and started doing this in 1989. So we're going on 30-year anniversary next year. So I see a lot of what can happen when you do the proper things necessary to maintain that muscle tissue. So the lecture was originally called Sarcopenia and Exercise, Delaying the Onset of Age-Related Degenerative Disease. And that's what we're really looking at doing here. So as any good scientist, we have to cite our sources. The people that coined that phrase, sarcopenia, was two doctors, William Evans, PhD, and Erwin Rosenberg. This was at Tufts University. They wrote an interesting book called The 10 Biomarkers of Aging, if anyone is interested in getting that. But sarco meaning flesh or body, penia meaning reduction in amount. And the question is, what causes sarcopenia? It's not due to the aging process itself. It's merely correlated with aging. It's due to a specific type of disuse atrophy. So the thing is, when we're younger, we do things like climb on monkey bars, climb trees. We activate something called high threshold motor units or fast twitch motor units, which innervate fast twitch fibers. Basically, it's strength tissue. strength-based tissue. We have some tissue in our muscles that are more apt for endurance, some tissue that are strength, and all these ones in between. But the thing is, as we get older, we tend to do less of these high threshold activities or strength-based activities. So we actually do lose that tissue as we age. And we tend to do even less, which means we lose more, and we tend to do less. And it's just a downward spiral from there until eventually you wind up in a nursing home. And I'll tell you a personal story afterwards about that from my own family. So this is not necessarily a condition of the advanced elderly. It actually starts in our 20s and 30s that we start to lose this muscle. So after the age of 30, adults typically lose about 10 ounces of muscle mass per year, which is about 8 to 10 pounds per decade. And that rate accelerates after the age of 45. So it's no longer a straight line, but it's a downward curve. And again, it's not due directly to the aging process, it's just correlated. So naturally, if you start earlier, you're better off, but you can reverse this to some extent, even in people above 90 years old. We've had experience up to people 96 years old. I don't know if this is, okay. So I don't want to get too geeked out on you guys. This was actually a lecture that was given at a high-intensity training seminar. So I was talking to doctors and physical therapists, other exercise physiologists, trainers, whatnot. But what I want you to think about here is that we're looking at muscle biopsy compared to old subjects. This gray tissue you consider endurance tissue. The red would be strength tissue. So we see in muscle biopsies in younger subjects, they have a much higher percentage of strength-based fibers, and older subjects has that loss. We lose the capacity for strength as we get older, much greater than the capacity for endurance. And this is actually how it happens. Literally, the word or the phrase, you don't use it, you will lose it. So a motor unit, we see fast twitch motor unit, slow twitch motor unit. A motor unit is comprised of the cell body, the neuron, which is in the spinal column, plus all of the muscle fibers innervated by that motor neuron. What happens with those high threshold or fast twitch motor neurons, if we don't use them, they literally will die. So you are having nerves over time, unless you activate those, that will die off. Most of the fibers that were innervated by that motor neuron will go through atrophy rapidly, and some of them will completely die. Now, some will be re-innervated by the surrounding oxidative fibers that sprout new dendrites, and you see it change type. So in older muscle tissue, in a biopsy, you see what's this grouping or clustering rather than sort of a checkerboard pattern right here, unless you do something to maintain that tissue, which it is possible. So what are the consequences of sarcopenia or this age-related muscle loss? Well, pretty much and this is somewhere the font's like got all messed up, but almost every condition that is associated with the aging process is directly correlated to sarcopenia. And all of these can be reversed or improved by high-intensity resistance training. So we start to see the loss of lean muscle, decreased muscular strength, obviously decreased basal metabolic rate, which leads to increased body fat percentage, cardiovascular capacity, aerobic, which is an oxidative or an enzyme capacity. Most people get that term confused. Increase in blood pressure, insulin sensitivity, cholesterol, decreased bone density, and eventually unsteady gait and increased risk of frequency and falling among older subjects. And this was just at the time, there's new research that's literally being released all the time. Just recently, there was a paper released, and there's actually more than one paper on this, but high-intensity resistance training increases BDNF, something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor is strongly correlated to a certain type of memory task called high interference memory. This is the type of memory that allows us to make small distinctions between objects. For example, being able to distinguish between a car that we own with the same make and model to another car. So like a slight scratch or a dent or something hanging from the rearview mirror. So this high interference memory is strongly correlated. If you lose this high interference memory, there is a very high chance you're going to get dementia. And what we see now with high intensity training, whether you do high intensity resistance training or high intensity interval training, is strongly correlated. You have elevations in this brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So we're also looking at diabetic neuropathy. Treats diabetic neuropathy, basically halts it, can even reverse it. It's also the best thing to do for Parkinson's patients. So I've seen people with all this. Now, let me back up for a minute because there is enough research and evidence on any one of these topics. For example, decreased insulin sensitivity. I could have given an entire lecture on that, how high intensity training improves that. When I did this was just an overview of sarcopenia, but when I tell you there are literally hundreds of studies published in medical journals and physiology journals, the amount of the available evidence is just overwhelming to me. And there's more data that's coming out all the time. It's sort of what I call the domino effect of degeneration. So, basically first we start to lose muscle and strength, which leads to a decreased resting metabolic rate, increased body fat percentage, decreased resting metabolic enzymes, decreased insulin sensitivity, cholesterol issues, and eventually loss of bone mineral density, unsteady gait, and as we know now, after this presentation was done a while back, loss of cognitive function also. So what is the best treatment for sarcopenia? Well, it's not fun, and it's hard, it's difficult, but it's very, very safe. It's high-intensity resistance training. It is the best way to halt, stop, and even reverse this process. So back in 1991, two researchers, Evans and Rosenberg, looked at functional performance tests in older subjects that were strength-trained versus, so you had strength-trained 70-year-olds versus 50-year-olds that were untrained but healthy. So their muscle functional performance tests were identical to those that were 20 years younger. And we have a lot of newer information now, but we're turning the clock back by about 20 years. I like to refer to this as slowing the degenerative curve from independent to dependent living. I don't want to go over too many individual studies, but there's one that's really, really important that I wanted to focus on. This is one of the foundational studies in high-intensity resistance training. Dr. Mia Fiatarone in 1990 did a study with high-intensity strength training and frail nursing home residents. All of the residents were over 90 that she worked with. The oldest was 96. So we saw an increase in the strength of the knee extensors, quadriceps, of about 174%. You did see hypertrophy of muscle or increase in muscle tissue of those same muscles by about 9%. But there was something that was even more significant than that. One of the things, gait speed is the strongest correlator among falls among older subjects. And their gait speed increased by an average of 48%. Now this study's been duplicated time and time again, and in community dwelling people you generally see with high intensity strength training a gait speed increase of about 50%. There were other functional performance tests that were done. For example, getting out of the chair without the use of the arms. So none of the subjects were able to do so at the beginning of the study. At the end of the study, they were all able to do so. The ones that needed walkers and canes no longer needed walkers and canes. I just started working with a woman recently. We've just been training for 2 months. She's participating in a longitudinal study at Pennington Biomedical Research Center here in Baton Rouge. And she's had some problems, some issues with pain. I've had to do some things with limiting range of motion on certain exercises and whatnot. But we've only been doing this for 2 months, and she told me I'm only going to give it 2 months to see if it makes a difference. Well, one of her performance tests was being able to get up and down and how fast she could do it 5 times without the use of the arms out of the chair. She couldn't do it at all. In just 2 months, she was able to do 5 times fairly quickly. So she said, I'm hooked, that's it, I'm continuing. So it's the functional performance test for the improvement in everyday living is the thing that probably gives me the most fulfillment of what I do, and the fact that people tell me because of you I live pain-free. Now I could go over data all day long, but I really like pictures because pictures sort of answer 1,000 words. So these are CAT scans of different women's thighs throughout the aging process. Here we're looking at a 25-year-old moderately active woman. You know, we're basically meat. So here we see the skeletal muscle. We also have intramuscular fat like marbling when you cut open a roast or a steak or something. You see the cortical bone here, the trabecular bone where the bone marrow goes. 25-year-old moderately active. This is a 58-year-old woman who's sedentary. Look at the amount of degeneration that's gone on. The loss of muscle mass, the increase in body fat, both subcutaneous and intramuscular, the loss of bone mineral density. But this is a 63-year-old woman who does high-intensity resistance training. She looks much closer to the 25-year-old than the 58-year-old. So again, it's not due to the aging process, it's just correlated with the aging process. It's due to disuse atrophy. This is a bone biopsy. And guys, when I tell you some of this is not new research, this is from 1986, Journal of Bone Mineral Research. It takes a long time to filter down to the general population though, unfortunately. This is a 47-year-old woman who's sedentary with the beginnings of osteoporosis. I'll be 47 next month, so this makes me wake up when I look at this. So she already has a fracture here. I mean, this is like cobwebs compared to Swiss cheese. This is a 75-year-old woman who does high-intensity resistance training. You can see the difference in the density of the tissue, the aging process. And so there's a huge difference between chronological aging and biological aging. Again, there's a mess up with the fonts here, but I love the name of this study because it says it all. Its exercise effects on bone mass in postmenopausal women are site-specific and load-dependent. So when you go to get a test for bone density, they usually do the spine and the hip because of those are the most important places. That's where a fracture usually happens. That makes you fall and then you're done. So it's interesting. If you look at runners generally have more density in their lower extremities. And tennis players have about twice the density in their dominant racket arm as they do in a non-dominant arm. So it's really important that we're talking about site-specific and load-dependent. So we want the load to increase. We want to make sure you're getting stronger. But the beautiful thing about resistance training, especially with the proper tools, is we can target every single joint in the body. Because if you have osteoporosis or osteopenia or whatever, or any bone loss, it's occurring through your entire skeleton. It's not just occurring in your lumbar and in your hip. What this study did is looked at 3 different groups of people. They had older controls, low intensity resistance training, which you really can't see that here in between. And then you have the high intensity group. The important thing to keep in mind here was only the high intensity group actually had increases in bone density at all 4 tested sites. There was no change in the low intensity group, and for the most part, the control group continued to lose density at least 3 of the tested sites. So what does this mean? Most exercise training studies are short-term in nature because of subject funding, subject retention, funding, compliance, yada, yada. You may see 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. The longest you'll see 24 weeks, 6 months. So what this study did was look at a cross-section of subjects, and in order to participate in the study, you had to do your respective activity for between 12 and 17 years. That's a pretty long time. What they did was they looked at the 5 groups. There were young controls, there were older sedentary subjects, older runners, older swimmers, and older strength-trained subjects. So they did muscle performance tests, but they also took muscle biopsies to examine the tissue under a microscope. When they did so, this was the results of the study. In contrast to the swimmers and runners, the elderly strength-trained subjects had, we'll skip the physiology gobbledygook, and just both muscles studied identical to those of young controls. So their tissue showed no aging whatsoever. They couldn't tell the difference between an older subject that had done resistance training versus a younger subject's muscle biopsy. These results seem to suggest that strength training can counteract the age-related changes in function and morphology of the aging human skeletal muscle. So why does this happen? So this lecture was originally a hell of a lot longer, and John asked me to condense as much as possible. So what happens in the rebuilding of skeletal muscle when you exercise, if you train the muscle in a fatigue state and you allow the muscle to lengthen, which is called an eccentric contraction, so we're lowering controlled, during that fatigue state, it creates what's called microtrauma, or microscopic damage to contractile proteins, cytoskeletal proteins, some of the outer coverings of the muscle. And it stimulates a mechanism called the satellite cell process. Satellite cells are literally muscle stem cells. So when a muscle is damaged, and this is microtrauma, not macrotrauma, so we're not talking about injury to muscle, it's followed by a localized inflammatory response, which sets this process in place, and the inflammatory response is extremely necessary. So basically the inflammation clears away the debris, and I used to use this analogy before Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, but if we had a hurricane come and hit this building, we would want to clear the debris away and rebuild it with new bricks, new mortar, new wood, and not rebuild it with the debris. If you were to take high levels of anti-inflammatories, you actually prevent this process from occurring, and you just rebuild the muscle with debris, which can actually lead to long-term muscle dysfunction, misaligned myofibrils. But when you rebuild it, you're rebuilding it with brand new contractile proteins. And when the muscle stains heavily for inflammation, it also stains heavily for something called embryonic myosin heavy chains. Now, you don't have to know what MHC really means. It's just brand new contractile proteins. So one of my clients calls this process internal exfoliation. So you really are renewing the cells. The reason why they call it embryonic is it's the exact same tissue found in the developing embryo. It hasn't even taken on type yet. So I'm going to, I wanted to just give you an example of some of the geekiness of some of these studies. And scientists are extremely measured in their wording. They have to be very, very careful about what they say. So this is one study that says effects of resistance training on expression of insulin-like growth factor 1 splice variants in younger and older men. Anybody in here understand that? So unless you're a physiology geek like me, most people won't understand that. But scientists have to be very, very careful in their wording. So in 2007, a group of researchers looked at a total of 596 genes. Half of those genes decreased their protein expression with the aging process, and half increased their protein expression with the aging process. When they put these older subjects on resistance training programs, everything reversed. The genes that decreased their expression started to increase, and the genes that increased started to decrease. Hence, the name of the study is literally Resistance Exercise Reverses Aging in Human Skeletal Muscle. Every time I read that, I get a chill up my spine because that is so powerful. And I don't know why this study wasn't on Oprah, every show, everything whatsoever, because this is the closest thing we have to the fountain of youth. And that's reflected in my clientele. Like I said, these people have been with me for a long time, and they're non-agenarians. So here is just giving you an example. We're looking at younger subjects, older subjects, that's their gene profile or their genetic expression profile. We have young, old, young, old. When they put those subjects, again, on the resistance training program, this is old without the resistance training. This is old with the resistance training. So gene expression changes associated with aging are reversed to youthful levels after 6 months of exercise training. And the question is, again, how long does it take? Now, I've done my own research on this in grad school. I've done some studies. I've written papers. One of them's on my website. But basically, so this study looked at 46 older men and women. They were between 65 and 79 years old, 24 weeks. They trained in a high-intensity manner. And when they examined the performance between once, 2, and 3 times per week, there was no significant difference in results in either strength or muscle mass gain. And I mean, I could talk more about that in depth at another time if anybody's ever interested in learning more. What I want you to take from this is that resistance exercise reverses aging in human skeletal muscle. So the personal story I'm going to tell you is one from my own family. I've been doing this for a long, long time. This is what my college degrees are in, is in exercise physiology, both undergraduate and graduate. So I've started training people when I was 18. I opened my first business at 24. My business partner, we're together in business for 18 years, and then I opened Exercise Science about 4.5 years ago to really target a specific population that I thought was being greatly underserved. Number one are our seniors. The training programs that are out there, CrossFit, all this other stuff, that's just not suited for those people. And the potential risk of injury is way too high. What we have is a protocol that was actually invented to treat osteoporosis. 1982, University of Florida, College of Medicine, Nautilus Osteoporosis Project. But not only did they do the slower protocol because it was safer, but they found it was more effective. When they examined the results, the women that did the slower protocol had 40% more strength gains in the same amount of time as the women that did the faster protocol. Now, my dad is 66 now. I've watched him slowly kill himself over the past 25 years or so. He went in a nursing home at 64 years old. He's diabetic. He's never taken care of himself. He was on Medicaid. Everything was paid for by our tax dollars. He had the best team of doctors you could possibly imagine. And he just stopped going. Therapists would come to the door every day. He stopped answering. Aides would come to take him to the doctor's appointment. He stopped answering. All he would do was drink beer at night and eat candy and M&Ms and drink Coca-Cola during the day. He poops in a diaper. He can't wipe himself. He's had horrible neuropathy for a long time, no feelings in his hands whatsoever, can't dial a phone, can't hold it next to his ear to talk to me. His foot is black, he needs an amputation. He's not able to have an amputation because he's not healthy enough. He had C. diff colitis, which almost ate through his colon. He's on stage 5 renal failure, and he has to have dialysis 3 times a week. I don't know how he's not dead yet, but he's not. I'm the only person in his life that actually speaks to him, and we can't speak that often because every time I call, I get this maze of computer, press 0 for an operator, whatnot. He's eliminated, he's also lost it mentally. He's on antipsychotics, antidepressants, and anti-anxiety. And the thing is, all the people I've helped, I couldn't help my own family member because he didn't want it. I can't force people to do it. Now, you guys have invested with John for your financial health. Would you be interested if I told you, would you make an investment for one 30-minute session a week in your physical health? How many people would be interested in that? Thanks. Any questions?
Did this include a diet or anything? Any kind of?
We can certainly work with diet, and there's a lot of research we could talk about. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not supposed to prescribe a diet, but I can certainly share the data with you. and depending upon what that person has, work within that framework. So I'm also bringing in other people. A friend of mine about a year ago finished his PhD at LSU in exercise phys. He is currently doing postdoc research at Pennington Biomedical. He's really interested in coming into our business. I have several physicians that are going to be coming in, Dr. Sean Abraham and Dr. Sean Mani, and Dr. Miriam Menhem is an endocrinologist. So I'm getting a strong team of people that are very, very interested in potentially collaborating with what we're doing. Also, before I forget, for a while now, I've been putting in some work with a company called DNA Fit. DNA Fit is a company based out of London. You basically do a swab, prescribe. It can tell me lots of variables. It can tell me what your fiber type distribution is. It can tell me your recovery rate, your inflammation rate, rates of protein collagen synthesis, vitamin D receptor, whether you do better on a low carbohydrate diet versus a Mediterranean versus a low fat, how much omega-3 fatty acids you need, pretty much everything across the board. So there's not too many places you can go and have someone look at the raw genetic data and tell you, I know who you are and what you are at the cellular level, and we can have a really good idea where we need to start. Sir?
What's the difference in low resistance and high resistance training? Did it make a difference?
Okay, so that's a great question. And we define intensity a few different ways. In the research literature, they usually define intensity as intensity of load. For example, if you could lift a maximum effort one time of 100 pounds, training with 80% of that load they would consider higher intensity in training with like 20% of that load. Now, there's different definitions of intensity. The one that I like to focus on is intensity of effort. And that is basically the rate of fatigue that you work to. So muscle fatigue is defined as a loss of that muscle, or as a decrease of that muscle to generate force. So if you're training with, let's say, 80 pounds on a specific exercise, when that muscle is fatigued to the point that it can no longer do another repetition or even support that load, you're said to be at 100% of momentary effort. Now, we can only measure that by looking at 0 and 100. I can't measure that 80%. I don't know what that is. So the stimulus for that growth mechanism is when you allow that muscle to be trained to the point of fatigue, which is extremely safe. That level of intensity of effort is not injurious at all. But lower that weight resistantly very, very slowly and allow that muscle lengthen under control. That sets the stimulus for all this to go. Then there's absolute intensity, which is one of the things we're really interested in. In science, we only want objective measurements of improvement. We don't want subjective measurements of improvement. Our one objective measurement of improvement is that you're getting stronger from workout to workout, or at least you're getting stronger over time. So if you start training at 100 pounds and you get stronger where you're doing 200 or 300, and that's not unusual for many of my clients, you've doubled or tripled your absolute intensity. So that's the total amount of stress that the body or the organism is capable of supporting.
And while we're here while we're eating, just answer more questions. Very good questions. Let's raise your hand. You raise your hand.
Raise my hand.
Yeah, they're good. I don't know, as long as this lady is not my wife last 10 months. Stand, please.
I'm the one that's leaving, I'm the culprit.
All right, stand up. Stand up, think about.
I'm moving.
He wants you to stand up.
She's going to be here for a while. We've got a number of people that are coming to help us out do this, but I think what I'll share a little more clearly for you. What this is slow resistance exercise. So if you're doing bench press, Mike, you don't do it like you do it right at the gym. This takes 10 seconds on the way up to get up there, and 10 seconds on the way down. And you do enough weight, you can't do it more than a minute and a half to 2 minutes. So you have very, very few injuries to this. The big challenge for us is that you can't do this with the equipment at the typical gym. There's specialized equipment made for this type of exercise, and that's what I've done. JCN has sponsored this with this organization. We bought the equipment that's being delivered this next week. And this is not a gym. It's not a gym, it's a studio. When you go into it, there are no mirrors. And it's not a vanity place. And when you may have another person or two in there while you're there, but probably no more than 2 people at a time. and you have one-on-one training with this. Your step right now, after hearing what Ryan said to say, is you've got that form in front of you. If you want to participate, check it off, and then Kate's job is going to be to coordinate you with evaluation with Ryan or one of his staff. You have to do an evaluation first, then do your workout, and that we'll sponsor and cover you with that. But I think it's for my friends and clients, I think it's the most important thing I can recommend to you. How many know Harvey Pryor, my client here? Anybody know Harvey? You should. He's 94 years old. And I guarantee you, he can outwork most men in this room. I'm not exaggerating. Harvey works out 3 times a week with weights. He's in fantastic shape. And over the years, I've seen people like Ray Kelly here, who's raising him, raising great shape because they exercise on a regular basis. That's the key to all of life, is moving. So we have 52 people of your co-clients that have checked off the box to visit with me. Please consider it strongly. If you want to do it, check it off, give it to one of my staff after Ryan finishes, and let me know if this is worthwhile. And for those of you that are newly retired, it's really a good thing to think about doing. So without any further ado, Alex, who's going to pick up the JCN topic here, our mid-year update.
Thanks, guys. All right, we're gonna do a little 7th inning stretch. This change was told to me on Monday, so I took something that was going to be pretty comprehensive and I really chopped it down to hopefully something that at least you can take away one single thing tonight from. If you don't remember, last time was the first of 3 kind of very technical presentations. So if you're a new client, don't worry, there's going to be a lot here that you have no idea what I'm talking about. So it's okay, we're filming it, we can go back, show you the first videos. And I will say, we're going to kind of, now with Kate here, we've been getting sort of really technical and advanced with some of the things that we're doing here, research in-house, and we want to kind of bring it back to basics, so to speak. So starting next year, don't worry, we're going to kind of be mixing in a lot of different topics. Some are a little bit more basic. But this is essentially really important to us because we do all our research here in-house, and we spend a lot of time and effort behind the scenes making sure that the technology that we build here is proprietary and is up to my standards, which are very, very high. So part of this is introducing a new strategy that we're bringing on board that's going to run alongside what everybody here is already using to be invested. And part of that is to recap what is that old strategy, and then so when I introduce a new one, you can kind of see what the differences are and maybe have some questions. Also going to talk a little bit about the additional research that we're using in this new model that adds a little bit more octane, that I say, to the engine to give us a little more horsepower. And then I always like to end it with just some brief data points about the economy, where we're at. This year has been no shortage of headlines, some distractions, some fake news. So I'd like to at least leave you with some key things I think are important to take home and think about going forward. So a recap of the persistent value strategy. When I first started working with John, and I worked in the hedge fund space for about 10 years before we built JCN's model. We typically design something to make the most amount of money possible with a certain amount of risk. And when I was talking with John, it was very clear that's not really what he wanted. And he wanted something, what I call a little bit backwards, meaning it had to be designed in reverse. It had to be designed with the risk portion first, and then the performance portion of that would basically come after. So, one of the things that comes with a model that we've been running is that it's just not possible to make money every single month. And I know most of you guys know that, but I've had a few conversations with clients that I think just, believe there might be a magic money machine in the sky that spits out dollar bills. And we have to be realistic about how this works and very transparent, so that when we all experience this together, we know what's going on, and we can also anticipate, certain experiences as they come. Again, it's not designed to make the most returns. It really wasn't. It was designed to have the same or better returns as the S&P, kind of on a quarterly basis, to speak, with much, much less risk. And risk meaning the strategy itself was built to avoid a catastrophic drawdown. So, it does have ups and downs, but it's really designed with not losing all your money, essentially, is the main goal. So the investment cycle over this measurement period, the realistic cycle is about 3 years, so 3 to 5 years. So, we can look at it from quarter to quarter or from month to month, but in all reality, it is really meaningless on a month-to-month scale because it's not designed to perform over that period. It's designed to look over full cycle. Some of the facets that come with the strategy is very high turnover. We don't use many funds as most people are used to investing in a mutual fund or a host of mutual funds. You just buy them and you sit in them, and then that's how you go. And you either make money or don't. You have no idea what you own. We invest directly in the stocks themselves, and we manage them all actively. Some of the things that are very, very real about this strategy is it can potentially underperform for many quarters. Meaning, if we get out of the market 100% cash and don't own any stock, there is a possibility the stock market could keep going up without us and we're underperforming, or in like a sideways period like this year, as we have to stop out and control risk and then essentially buy back in at higher prices sometimes, that will reduce our alpha or our outperformance. And we know that basically from the beginning. We just wanted to point that out. But really the design here is for safety first, and the last 2 bear markets that were severe in the United States had over 40% drawdown, lost almost half your money just being in the stock market. So that's really what it's designed for, is to sidestep that risk and not have that happen to any one of our clients. So that was sort of the architecture behind it, and whereas the Olivia strategy on the show is very different. And I know this is very wordy, I just had to dump it all on this slide. So the benchmark that we use for persistent value is the S&P 500, and this year it's más o menos 4%, depending upon which day you look at it. The behavior is very flat and choppy, meaning up and down from a 0 point. And I know we've told this many times in meetings, and John's mentioned it. This is just the type of environment where it's going to struggle versus just being in the S&P, versus the benchmark. So we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. For example, one single stock out of the 8,000 stocks in the entire stock market accounted for 36% of that 4% move. Almost half was just one stock, Amazon. So if you didn't own Amazon this year, you probably didn't get that big of a return. We obviously don't, in a direct sense. And I already kind of talked about this, but the other part of our strategy, which we're going to recap in full detail later this year, because we kind of did it earlier, we call the eject handle. It's where when we pull that thing, proverbial eject handle, we dump everything. We sell every stock that we own. And those are very, very far off from telling us to get out of the stock market right now, and I'm going to show you, where those are at. This is essentially the year so far, mid-year update. As you know, we were here in January kind of patting ourselves on the back, up 8% in 2 weeks, kind of like, wow, we've already almost made our year, and hopefully this will be another double-digit year. And we just kind of hit a pretty big field of volatility. A lot of funds blew up in January, February, and we went from being up 8% to down 10% in literally 3 days. And I know it was scary for some of you guys, but it's one of those things where we were very proud of the process there, because we stopped out of a lot of positions when the market went down. We went to cash. So in perfect hindsight, yeah, obviously we shouldn't have sold anything, but that's not how this works. If it's going down and it looks bad, it will cut our losses at a minimal amount in case we go down even further to a crash. So the economy was very good, we mentioned earlier in the year, and it's telling us to stay invested. So it goes up, we actually sold here and bought some here, it goes down again, a few more positions get stopped out. Ouch, right? That's the opposite we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to sell low, buy high. But that is what happened this year. And that's what took us from being ahead about 2% at one point to now being behind 2% in the gross sense of almost every account. Now, we are up some this year in most people's models. If you're a newer client, it could be a little bit different depending on where here we got you invested. But essentially, I'm fairly sure most people are up in their accounts. And as we said, the economic data isn't necessarily reflected in the stock market all the time. It sometimes takes, a little bit of emotional calmness, Right here was all that tariff trade war stuff, and people were dumping without any good reason. A company like 3M, one of the biggest industrial conglomerates on the planet, went down like 40% in a month. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense, but it's just a lot of fear hit the market. And we've since clawed back, and I believe we're going to have a little bit more calm rest of the year and end up probably around 10-12%. I think that's kind of what it's looking like. So I always like to show a lot of data here because I never have to guess what's going on, ever. I literally can type it in my terminal and I can find out what's going on to the highest granularity, basically within minutes. And this year is really interesting because 10 stocks have contributed essentially 100% of the S&P's return. So since we're invested in individual stocks, and some of these we do own, this is why we haven't been able to perform at the S&P's level this year, because it's been very narrow. So, for example, we own Microsoft, Apple, Google. We used to own PayPal for a while. We had to stop out of it, but payment systems are doing really well. We do own Adobe systems. And the interesting part about this is the model chose these stocks prior to this happening. So we are very happy that it's able to find companies that are basically attributing to the biggest performance of the S&P. It just so happened we didn't quite get all of that yield. And if you really look at this, almost just 4% of them account for almost all of it. So it's a very thin market, and it's not anything good or bad to worry about. It's just what's happening. The reason this is happening, in my view, is the trading wheels are off. There's no more stimulus coming from the Federal Reserve. Now there's actually policies in Washington that are negative to a lot of these sectors. There's still a lot of uncertainty in certain areas. Interest rates going up for the first time in 10 years have hit sectors like utilities and real estate pretty hard. So if you just owned, we had one client who goes, why don't we just buy the NASDAQ and own just technology? And I say, well, we don't do that here. In perfect hindsight, yes, just buy tech stocks and you make money. I mean, that worked well in 2000, right? It will go down in its time. And the strategy is meant to be sensible and diversified. So, what this acronym, and you'll read this in the papers, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, FANG, basically was 90% of the return this year, and the rest of the stock market, those 7,993 stocks, all were averaging down this year. So it's neither good or bad. We just wanted to show what's going on. And I think a lot of it is just digesting new policy and the tax changes and everything. And, as we've shown before, stock market returns are not linear. They're very lumpy. You'll get one year, make 22% like last year, and then you'll get kind of the sideways piddling stuff, and then it'll go up again. So I just wanted to share that so that you understood why we're performing how we're doing with persistent value and sort of the environment. So if it ever happens again, you go, oh, I know why. It's not a mystery. So this next strategy is really something that's more in my wheelhouse. Having worked on the street for over 10 years, doing a lot of this is designing very high alpha strategies. For those of you who don't remember what that means is we're trying to not only beat the market, but literally squeeze as much performance as we can out of a strategy that's just mathematically possible. So the way you do that is you have to own basically a different type of stock, and you have to design a strategy that behaves a lot differently than what we're doing now. It has to become what's called opportunistic. And really, in a summary of how that works is we use all the data we have, which is a tremendous amount, to look at the market basically on a monthly basis, sometimes more, and say what's going up, what's profits are going higher, and which sectors are the most favorable right now. And then it just tries to buy those stocks. And then it reevaluates as soon as possible and changes the portfolio over and over again. Now, what comes with this type of strategy is it will have periods of very, very deep underperformance. And I'll show you. You can't get more return without having more risk. It's just one of those barbell things that you can never get away from, that if you really want to make more money, you have to put more at risk. Do you have a question? No. Okay. So The goal with this one is to have twice the S&P over a little bit shorter cycle, about 2 to 3 years. And what that means is if the S&P goes up 10, we want to be up 20 over that period. Or if S&P goes down 30, we actually want to be up 15 or down 15. You know, we want to do a little bit better, but times 2 essentially. Really, what this is not appropriate for, and this is something me and John are kind of evaluating, is accounts that are taking RMD withdrawals. Because of the activity, it might not be appropriate for those accounts. It might not even be appropriate for like balanced portfolios, but we could probably do it in certain instances. Meaning these things are going to take away from the return. And as long as we're clear with that, it's possible we can blend this in. It's also not for clients who are afraid to see realized losses in the account, meaning when we stop out or something, it'll show a real loss. It's probably going to be much more active. So right now the plan is to roll this out really just in model 5 and 6, which are considered aggressive growth accounts. That's 80% stock, 20% bonds, and 100% stock. So it's really not for the majority of our clients, but it's something that we've been asked for quite a long time, and we're really, really happy to be close to launching it. Now, these are just a few graphics from the platform itself. This was being installed today on our cloud server by Dave Bergstrom, who we met last time. He'll be here in August to talk more about this. It may not seem like much, but this is a program that just took a tremendous amount of mental effort to create in the right way. And you know what this shows you is the algorithm's stock picking ability. We don't have any risk management on this yet. We just say how well does it do picking stocks versus just the S&P. And it also shows the risk, which is the drawdown. And so you can see in 2009, which is one of the worst markets in our recent history, the S&P lost about 57%, and this lost about 63%. So it's spitting distance of being the same. That being said, over that period of time, 2005 to 2018, it made essentially 800% versus the S&P only made 200%. So magnitudes higher. And that's where the octane is. You know, you can see this is designed to swing for the fences, so to speak, with you know same or actually possibly more risk at certain points. So that's going to be inside the Olivia strategy, the picking the stocks. And what it's doing is picking different types of stocks. It's not. I mean, right now we're using very large cap, very safe in standards of safe companies to invest in, and this is going to look for riskier stuff, basically. Here's another graphic. I know it looks the same, but this is using one of our overlays that we already use, the Pulse. And you can see that these flat periods are when it says to stay out of the stock market. It can reduce the drawdown, but at the same time, you can see it went from an 800% return, and it was hard to see, to a 700% return. So we lost 100% return because we added that risk management, right? We reduced the risk, we're going to reduce the return. It's just not possible to have a free lunch in this business. So there's just a couple more examples of that we're experimenting with, and we can talk about these later date. Some of these are just images of the actual platform. We're going to show this probably in client meetings at some point once we get it to look prettier. It just looks like a program right now. But this is essentially like my cockpit. This is what I'm using to turn the dials and get all the information that we need to kind of get this. So the key things that John wanted me to summarize here is that it's more than just a single model that we built. We could have done this through Parallax, but their business has grown, and we're one of maybe 30 clients with them, and we're very happy with what they built for us. But last year we wanted some R&D done. We had to get in line, and we were behind 7 other clients. We had to wait a few months, and then when we get it, it's like we felt like we were rushed along in their process. And there's always things we wanted to do right afterwards. As they said, well, you got to wait another 5 months to get in line. We're like, oh gosh. So we just decided we got to do this ourselves, and we're going to do it right, so we can push through a lot of this R&D. So we're going to have 2 essentially products here, 2 different approaches to investing. One of them is going to be a very conservative strategy that you're already, almost all of you are in today. And then we're going to have a much more aggressive strategy. Some of these will have risk overlays that we're still waiting to deploy. And the last thing I'll emphasize is There's really no such thing as a model that makes money every single month. If anybody ever comes to you with that deal, please run for the hills. It does not exist, and we can show through many ways why that doesn't exist. So the couple of things that add this extra performance, if you're wondering how do we get it to go from 400% to 800%? Well, you have to look at things that are beyond the fundamentals of a company. The fundamentals are public knowledge. You know, other firms can get fundamentals just same we do. What we had to add is a lot of proprietary technology that I've used at other companies that is more difficult to attain and, you know, much more scientific in nature to understand. So one of the things that we've been incorporating is something called a FIP score. It stands for frog in the pan. Don't ask me why. It's just kind of a weird name. But essentially what we're looking at is technical analysis factors. And anybody ever heard that term, technical analysis? It's part of finance that is examining price action, and historically it looks at charts to try to forecast direction of markets. And I hold advanced degrees in this discipline. And I'll tell you, recent technology, unfortunately, has been able to disprove 90% of any of that. And I think it's fortunate because with the compute power we have now, it's much more comprehensive to find things that really have evidence than to hold on to these things that were basically invented in the 60s and 70s. So we use the FIP score, we use a thing called relative strength groups, and I'll show you an example of that. And then we also use something that has been really difficult to attain because the exchanges raised the price on this data like 100 times. It used to be basically $10 a month, now it's much more. But what it is good companies tend to not be shorted. And I know that's might be a new thing to hear, but when a firm believes that a stock's going to go down, like Tesla, you know, burning cash, basically huge debt problems, they'll go to a bank and they'll say, I'm going to borrow your Tesla shares that you own, and I'm going to sell them on the open market at $300. And then that way, if it goes down in price, I can buy it back for $250 and pocket the difference and basically make money betting the stock will go down. That's what shorting is. So the exchanges know exactly how many shares are shorted of every single company, and it just so happens that there's many studies that show this, that companies that don't have very much shares shorted, it's hard to say, tend to do better than companies that have many shares shorted. So companies with lots of shares shorted right now would be like GameStop. They are basically a blockbuster for video games. I really doubt that'll be around much longer. Blockbuster actually was a good one. BlackBerry, does anybody here own BlackBerry? Probably not. You know, they're going out of business, and there's big companies betting against them. Companies that have almost 0% of float are like Johnson & Johnson, MasterCard, JP Morgan Chase. There's just, everybody knows that these companies are not going out of business anytime soon, so there's no real reason to short them. So this is a good example of a high FIP score stock. Again, this doesn't look at any fundamentals of this company, it just looks at the price of the stock. And what this measures is, it takes a look at about a year's worth of data, and it says, is this stock up at the end of the day? It just counts every day. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And the theory behind this that's been proven is when you're a huge company like Vanguard or Fidelity or a huge bank, you cannot buy a stock until the very end of the day. You have to buy like 20,000, 100,000 shares. The only time of the day you can get that liquidity is the last hour. So in that last hour, their footprint can't be hidden of what they're doing. They literally have to go in and just buy what's there, and they tend to push the stock price up, at least above where the open was. So you get instances where, in this period of time, this stock, even though it didn't go up a ton, it was up every day about 70% of the days. So it's really interesting. And it's one of those situations where you're trying to anticipate the really smart big money because they know if this thing is going to go. They have huge intelligent teams. So that's a high FIP score stock. This is an example of a low FIP score stock where it's what I call a rip, a lotto ticket. You just rip it up, throw it on the ground. This thing was up, down for years, up, probably huge up days, down, and then all of a sudden the drug got approved and it was up, 100% in a day. We avoid these stocks like the plague. They're just not good performers. This isn't sustainable. You know, it's not something we want to incorporate. So there's a lot of technical analysis done here because we're looking at every single day, every single stock in the entire market and ranking them by this behavior, essentially smoothness of the stock price. We've talked about this in previous presentations, but I just wanted to show how blatant it is to see this. If you just bought all healthcare, you would have been up 300% versus everything else. Does it make sense to put money in healthcare? Absolutely. Energy is at the same point it was basically over 10 years ago. So it's just, you know, this new strategy is going to not try to diversify as much. It's going to be really concentrated in what we're trying to do. And this is just one image from that study about short interest. It shows the daily performance of the stock by how shorted it is. So the most shorted stocks usually only go down 0.5% a day. This is over like a 10-year period. So low shorted stocks go up about 0.5% a day. So just that one facet alone, that's, you know, a little bit harder to get data, is going to, you know, give that octane to the positions. And, you know, John is, you know, our intention is to incorporate this into the one we've been doing now to some degree. It's just been really hard to build till this point in time. It's taken about a year. So I'm just going to leave it there because the next presentation is going to finish this off, capstone of the new stuff coming here research-wise. And I want to just leave you guys with really some data to think about. You know, I don't watch financial news to get information, but I watch it to see what you guys are exposed to. And there's so much garbage out there. It's just really hard for me to not try to fix some of these things that I know are being peddled on a day-to-day basis. So, as you know, we bring this up sometimes in meetings. You know, it's unreasonable to expect to make money every month because what this shows is the average performance per month of the S&P. And this period, which we are in now, the summer doldrums, it just typically doesn't go anywhere. So, you know, just know that every year we're just we're hanging out, we're just waiting for opportunities. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. But it really, the gains are all made in 6 months: October, November, December, January through, you know, the end of April. Sometimes it'll last. So we position much more in this time to take advantage of the seasonality effect. Another thing that's interesting, but we don't use this to make any like really key strategic decisions, is we look at where we are in the presidential cycle. So first year typically is kind of wonky. People are in and out, undecided about the market. Next year, when they're actually enacting policy and, you know, rustling up everything in Washington, it can cause, you know, a kind of a disturbance. And we've sort of seen that this year. Like, we're in this little 6-month period that just typically doesn't do that well. If we can get up and above 5% for the year, I am a happy camper, just by the averages of what could be expected. You know, policies getting enacted and actually getting into play, that's usually third year, double digits. We're really looking forward to, you know, some of these tax effects coming in and helping our portfolios. The other thing that I find so interesting that never gets any coverage is profits. Profits have never been higher in this country, corporate profits. And, you know, they demonize it for whatever reason, get you guys to watch or the public to watch. And I will tell you, you know, economics is not that difficult. When a company has more profits, they can hire more people. When they hire more people, there's more people with paychecks, more people paying Social Security, more people buying homes, cars, college tuition. You know, it just really rolls down to some degree to the average Joe. So the thing to notice here is recessions are in gray. When you get really high profits, when they like kind of spike, it's impossible to like sustain that for a really long period of time. Some corporations engineer it, but you typically get a roll-off for quite a while before you get like a real recession. So the fact that we're like literally going vertical changes the models, and in my view, the closest recession possible is at least 18 months out. It's just, there's no data support that anything's going to crash the economy. Now there's weak spots here and there in the market, but you can see, you know, that is a lot for the economy to run on for quite some time. There's more people employed in the United States right now than the history of the country, and that's going to push forward. Some of these I'm just going to skip forward because I lost some of the slides in the transition. But this is just industrial production. Do we make things? If it's going up, we're making more things. If it's going down, we're making less things. We were in cash for this period of time because how the model looks at this, it says, okay, enough evidence is showing that we're slowing down, we're making less stuff, that we need to get out before this happens, right? So you'll see this more as we get closer to that potential situation, but you can see it's better to get out here with a 5% loss than a 50% loss. So we're very vigilant at monitoring this data, and we want to share with you guys because when we get to that point, I do not want it to be a mystery why we're doing what we're doing, okay? I'm going to skip some of these. The European Union thing that just happened. So to me, I saw an article about how we're going to get the short end of the stick with this, but I really wanted to show you the truth is that this is everybody's stock market in Europe, literally lower than it was in 2009 right now, and this is the United States stock market. We have the advantage. They have no chips at the bargaining table. They have no tech companies. They have no natural resources of any kind compared to us. There's just no reason to run a business in the European Union right now. So they want free trade, obviously, because they have nothing. You know, they need gas. They need agriculture goods. If they put any tariffs on that stuff, it'll worsen their situation tenfold versus us. So, you know, anything you read there, just realize we have the full advantage over the European Union, and you know, with our dollar going up, it hurts them. They can buy less stuff from us. So it's probably going to stay this way for some time. We have very minimal exposure to Europe directly, even though, you know, like Apple sells stuff all over the world. But this is someplace that we just don't feel confident putting any capital to. Is any of these countries: Italy, Spain, United Kingdom, France, Germany, nothing. Buybacks are happening. We've told you guys about this. We won't know where and how much till kind of after, but this is what was announced. And if I were to just leave you with one image on where we're at, is we're kind of in this period where we're in almost a boom phase. It could get even more good, as they say. We have no idea. If I were to put a number on it, we're in like the 7th inning. We just started the 7th inning, and there's no way to know how long the 9th inning is going to last. It could be years, it could be months, it could be double overtime. We have no idea till kind of we get there. But we know we have the systems to see when these things start to happen, and we're going to definitely be taking a totally different position, high cash position, treasury bonds. You know, when we see enough evidence, we're going to get it in the period. So any questions? I know I had to like rush through all this, but if you had any questions, now's the time to ask. And hopefully it wasn't too much at one time.
Could you repeat that?
I had to put a half hour in down and do it. So, yeah. If you ever think of anything at home too, feel free to email me. My card's on the front desk. That's what I'm here for, is to build channels of communication for what's going on with your money and how we're doing it. Yes.
We don't have any Facebook.
We do not own Facebook, thank God. It is down more than 20% within a year, and it's a mega cap company. So thank God we don't own it. It's never really shown up on our shopping list. You know, what was interesting is during the Facebook first round of security issues, you know, Google is a tremendously profitable company. They just are firing on all cylinders, and they have so much in the works for driverless cars and cell phones, and they're building fiber optic cables from Virginia to France right now. Like, they are not just a search engine. And they usually trade at such a premium, it never shows up on our buy list. You know, we have a shopping list, and it just so happened it went from like $1,400 to under $1,000 in a month. And there you go. That's what it's, you know, it sees that as a discount. Now it's up to $13.90. I don't know if you guys checked it, but that's kind of what it's looking for. It's looking for a great company at a bargain price, and you know, hopefully it goes up. So good comment there. You know, this year's kind of been avoiding landmines. Unfortunately, you know, we've had really solid positions. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon. You know, these are defense companies that are on the back of the biggest defense budget in history, and they just got hit with the tariffs fear a little bit, and they hit our stops, and we have to be disciplined to get out of these positions. We all know Lockheed's not going anywhere. They're the biggest defense contractor in the world, and we're having a Space Force now. So, you know, but what will happen is if it continues to behave well, it'll show up on the list again, and we'll probably end up buying, you know, one. So, any other questions on that, let me know. We have food and drinks outside if you guys would like, and we're recording this, so if you